Our gospel lesson this morning comes from the Gospel of Luke, the 21st chapter, beginning with the 5th verse. Get the right one here. When some were speaking about the temple, how it was adorned with beautiful jewels and gifts dedicated to God, Jesus said, "As for these things that you see, the days will come when not one stone will be left upon another. All will be thrown down." They asked him, "Teacher, when will this be? And what will be the sign that this is about to take place?" And Jesus said, "Beware that you are not led astray. For many will come in my name and say, 'I am he,' and 'the time is near.' Do not go after them. When you hear of wars and insurrections, do not be terrified. For these things must take place first, but the end will not follow immediately." Then he said to them, "Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes, and in various places famines and plagues, and there will be dreadful portents and great signs from heaven. But before all this occurs, they will arrest you and persecute you. They will hand you over to synagogues and prisons, and you will be brought before kings and governors because of my name. This will give you an opportunity to testify. So make up your minds not to prepare your defense in advance, for I will give you words and a wisdom that none of your opponents will be able to withstand or contradict. You will be betrayed even by parents and brothers, by relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death. You will be hated by all because of my name, but not a hair of your head will perish. By your endurance you will gain your souls." The gospel of Jesus Christ. Thanks be to God. Jesus is speaking to his disciples. And I'm sorry, I'm going to have to move. I'm also today practicing my audition for the Rockettes. And I'm sorry the way this looks, but it's just going to have to be. Thank you. Someone say, "I'm glad I'm back." Jesus is speaking to his disciples. He is teaching in the temple. And he has been there. This is following the Palm Sunday entry into Jerusalem. And he is speaking to them about what is to come and what to expect. Now we have to understand that Matthew was written maybe 50 or 60 years after Jesus' ministry. And it is composed of the oral tradition, the memories of the eyewitnesses, those who could recount what Jesus said. But Matthew also has a purpose to put the words of Jesus in the context of the reality that he lived in. By the time Matthew wrote his gospel, the temple had been destroyed, and the words of Jesus had been fulfilled. Not a stone was left standing. It had been completely destroyed. All that's left of that temple is today found in Jerusalem, known popularly as the Wailing Wall. The only remnant left of that Temple Mount. And if you've ever been to Jerusalem and seen, that is a massive wall. The blocks are of irregular shape, but just to look at that wall and think about it encircling the Temple Mount and the temple, it was phenomenal. It's all been destroyed. Jesus is saying, you think this looks pretty. Herod had put gold filigree around the top so when the sun would come up, it would catch the sun's rays and blaze just like fire and the presence of God. At sunset from the other side, the sun would hit the gold again and it would blaze. And people saw this as a symbolic evidence of God's presence in that temple. There were precious jewels around the temple inlaid in the walls. It was a very impressive figure, even compared to the buildings of Rome in the Roman Empire. But as Jesus said, not a stone was left standing. It was destroyed. The focus of the people's worship, what they had felt was the proof of God being with them, has been completely destroyed. And then Jesus goes on to say, and he gives us a warning. He says, be careful. The days are coming when many people will come and say, I am he, meaning I am the Messiah. I am the return of Jesus. I am he. Don't listen to them. They'll come telling you about wars and things that are and famines that are going to happen, and they will claim that this is proof that the return is now or is imminent. Don't listen to them, says another version. He says wars and famines and insurrections and all sorts of things are going to happen as a part of the world's resistance to the inbreaking of God's love coming into our midst. But again, as Jesus says in Acts, which was also written by Luke, the time and the moment of that occurrence is not known except by God. How many of you have heard or seen in the last few years, not just the last few years, many years, various prophets or those who figured they had figured out the last days? We had one just recently. The end of the world is coming on such and such a date. And this fellow claimed he had read the scriptures and found secret codes and worked it out on whatever apparatus he had designed to work it out. And he had the date. I believe it was in 2012. And the date came, and again there were fools who had sold all their property and were there waiting for the end to come. And the day came, and the day ended. And then the next day came and nothing happened. Well, he recalculated and says, I was a little off. It's 6 months from now. 6 months later, the sun came up, shined all day, the sun went down, and then the sun came up for another day. There have been people ever since Jesus who sought to set themselves up with the same authority and power of Jesus as they would claim that they are the portents, they are the prophet who comes to represent the end times. So Jesus says, don't listen to them. Don't listen to people who proclaim or write down what they see as secret teachings of the Bible and use it to say, this is how it's going to work. In Jesus' ministry and in Paul's ministry and the other apostles, the key part of the proclamation of God's love was that it would be made clear and open and include everyone. No one was to be excluded. If you're excluded, you have chosen to be excluded, either by your refusal to accept God's love or by your actions that go against God's love. But the message is open to all. But because of that message, the followers of Jesus are not going to have an easy time. There will be suffering. There will be persecution. There will be people who want to isolate you and avoid you, just like Earl the Bear has his friends saying, we don't want to have any part with them. That's how it was with the Christians. Because the Christians came into the world to proclaim a message that said everyone is a recipient of God's love. There is no hierarchy. There is no status. Everyone is a receptacle to receive the love of God and then to share that love with others. When John Wesley, who started the Methodist movement, which became the Methodist Church, back in the 18th century, he took this very seriously. In one of his most famous sermons, he compared God's love for the king as being no greater than the drunkard in the gutter of the streets of London. And people who heard that sermon in his church stood up and cried, "Treason!" Because in John Wesley's day, there definitely was a hierarchy. And those who were of the upper class, of the nobility and the royals, were considered definitely assured of entering the kingdom of heaven. And those who were below them, those who were poor and suffering, and the drunkards in the streets of London were condemned to hell. And John Wesley says, God loves that drunkard in the gutter just as much as he loves the king himself. And for that, he was accused of treason. One of the men stood up in the church that Sunday that he preached and said, "This is treason. This is not true." And John Wesley stepped out of the pulpit and said, "My good man, it is true, because the love of God will not be denied anyone." He was speaking in the words and in the teachings of Jesus. Now, the other part that makes me wiggle a little bit with discomfort is Jesus saying, my followers will have to take risks, they will be persecuted, they will be denigrated, all because my followers will represent a way of life that is counter to this world. In other words, instead of getting yours first, instead of looking at success and wealth as the proof of your acceptance and your whatever in life, the followers of Jesus will not have those as the most important parts. The followers of Jesus will put in front of success and wealth and security the ability to confront and stand up and speak out when any person or any group is being abused or taken advantage of. The followers of Jesus Christ will not worry about who they associate with, but will be free and loving to everyone that they meet. One of the most powerful witnesses in our ministry to the hungry that occurs every third Saturday is not just the actual food or car repairs that we do for them, but it is the love and acceptance that our volunteers offer to each person who comes needing help. Not standing in judgment, not looking on them as beneath us, not having any kind of thoughts like that, but looking on them as a human being just like us, in need of God's love in ways that may surpass our needs. One of the most powerful witnesses on these Saturdays is our willingness to include them and to not judge them and to not set ourselves up as superior to someone who has nothing. For all we know, they may have a lot more in their hearts and in their relationship with God than we could ever imagine. Back in the year 2000, my wife and I took our kids. We took a trip to San Francisco. I was doing a guest lecture at Pacific School of Religion across the bay. And we had a Sunday, and we decided to go to Glide Memorial United Methodist Church. Has anyone ever been there or heard of Glide Memorial? Glide Memorial is now located in what is called the Tenderloin District of San Francisco. And that name is not a complimentary name, because right around the corner from Glide Memorial are all the adult and strip clubs and various things that good Methodists would not have anything to do with. Originally, Glide was in the neighborhood that was a very prosperous neighborhood. And it was named in memory of the Glide family, who left the church a multi-million endowment. Yeah, wow. Wouldn't that be great? Over the years, the neighborhood changed and most of the people left. And the church was guaranteed to go for as long as it wanted with that kind of endowment. But the congregation had been reduced to about 35 people. All good white people, all well-off people who were coming, still trying to maintain the legacy of what Glide had been for almost 100 years. And yet, Glide was now located in the areas of San Francisco where there were homeless people, where there were hurting people, there were drug addicts, there were all kinds of people that you and I would not want to associate with. The bishop decided to appoint a black pastor by the name of Cecil Williams with the instructions, shake things up and develop a ministry and mission to the community where the church is. So Cecil Williams came in and he announced on that morning there was a huge cross bolted to the wall behind the altar. And he looked at the congregation and he says, we're taking that down. We don't deserve to have that symbol up until we live the teachings of Jesus. When we do, we may put it back, but until that day comes, we're not going to act like we're a real Christian community. Well, can you imagine? There was muttering in the congregation. And he laid out what he saw, his vision. We will go out into the streets. We will bring in the homeless. We will bring in the alcoholics, the winos. We'll bring in the drug addicts. We'll bring in the prostitutes. We will welcome them and show them that they have a place for God's love in this place. Next Sunday, he had 5 people. But those 5 people decided to yoke themselves to Cecil Williams' vision. And over the years, the ministry was built using that very healthy endowment that the church, the older members tried to take it back, saying that he was destroying the church and he was going to ruin the tradition and reputation of Glide Memorial Methodist Church. The bishop hung firm, supported Cecil. They tried to take it to the courts, and the courts say, can't do it. The money belongs to that church, and whoever is that church can use that money as they see fit, provided it is in accord with the mission and ministry of the United Methodist Church. When our family visited that church back in the year 2000, as we drove up, there was a scraggly looking fellow wearing a coat that was too small. He obviously had been sleeping in the street. He had a growth of beard, but he had a badge in his coat pocket that said he was a parking attendant for Glide and a little cross on it. And with great energy. He showed us, literally led us to a parking spot. And as we got out of our car, he said, "Welcome to church. We're glad to have you." When we got up to the doors of the church, there were a couple of other scraggly looking people that gave us a bulletin and helped us find a seat. The church was packed with people. There were so many people, there were only standing room for those that came late. And we sat in a pew, and it was a kaleidoscope of races, of cultures, of nationalities and incomes. We sat in a pew, and on this side of me was a fellow that hadn't had a bath in a while. But on the other side was a well-heeled matron from Marin County. If you know anything about that area, that's where the hoity-toity live, you know. And she was wearing a fur and pearls, dressed to the nines. She was there to worship Jesus Christ and her Lord and to be part of this witness. And Glide had a moment where you pass the peace. And everyone stands up, and you don't just say, "Oh, the peace of the Lord be with you." You know, you embrace one another. And I watched this well-heeled, proper matron of Marin County willingly and freely embrace this stinky old wino that was sitting next to her in church, crossing all kinds of bridges, all kinds of things that the world and us have set up to separate. In that moment of passing the peace, it all came down. Glide today has a program. It has the second largest social services to the city program of any area in San Francisco or the environments. They have a class to train people in new skills. They maintain 2 blocks of houses that have been converted into shelters to take care of the homeless, to work with them. They have rooms of computers to help educate people, to train them for jobs. And at key times during the year, they pass out turkeys. And the line of people waiting for turkeys goes around 2 blocks. They've been criticized. They've been compared to being something that is not what proper church people should be involved in. They've been persecuted. They have been defamed. Does that sound familiar to you? What did Jesus say that his followers could expect? Brothers and sisters, our church, like many churches, for some reason over time, we have slipped into the church being the place where we emphasize traditions that are not necessarily biblical, but are all about our social mores. We come to church to preserve the values and the things that we have used in this world to make ourselves proper. Churches are not places where risk is taken. Churches are not places where we have among us people that we would consider of questionable worth because of the way they look, because of the way they smell. And so what has happened over generations is the church has lost its cutting edge. And instead of being a place for the afflicted and the hurting, we've become a place of the comfortable and the affluent. What did Jesus say? If you stand for me, if you promote my teachings, you will be persecuted, you will be rejected, you will be thrown into prison, you will have all sorts of calamities happen to you because you are practicing and doing what I've taught you. Has anyone been in jail lately? I haven't. Have any of us been in a position where we had to take some risks because of the love of Jesus Christ. We wonder why we can't get people to come to our church. And part of the reason is we've become too comfortable, too set in our ways. Not just the way we do things, but we see ourselves as preservers of the lifestyles that we've grown accustomed to. We've become comfortable. And so we've lost that fire, that cutting edge, that witness that Jesus calls us to. The risking that happens if we bring in people who are not like us, people who we really don't associate with much, but if we include them, that means we've got to get to know them. And I don't want to get to know these people. Why can't we keep things the way they are and comfortable and non-threatening? If we do that, brothers and sisters, we're not following Jesus, but we're making the church an excuse, a rationalization for who we are and where we are now. When was the last time the church, not just our church, the church stood up to the government and said, "You're not going to do this. This is hurting people. This is defaming people. We will stand for those who are oppressed and hurting." When was the last time the church stood up to corporations that were trying to sell people items that they did not need because that's the way they made money? When was the time the church stood up to the tobacco industry when it became clear that smoking was hazardous to health and could end in someone's life being ended? When have we, the church, stood up and confronted something going on in our own community that does not represent the love of God, but represents someone making a dollar and could care less about the consequences of other people? You see, this activism is a reflection of the love that Jesus called us to practice. Those early Christians confronted the Romans. They did not accept the practices of the Romans or worshiping the gods or whatever. They stood up in their witness. And because of that, they were persecuted and they were thrown into prison. And sometimes they lost their lives. But the church grew then. The church burst in increase in its membership and population, and the church swept through the world because of the witness of Christians forming communities and demonstrating that they not only loved one another, but they shared that love and made that love possible for people around them. When we can rediscover that power, that risk-taking, that understanding of sacrifice in Jesus' name, our pews are going to be full. We won't have to keep thinking up one gimmick after another to get people to come here. They will be here because of our witness and because of the community around us seeing that we are more than just people who want to be comfortable. Amen.